Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about a new kind of eco-tourism. Hello, listeners, and welcome to another Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm your host for today. My name is Simon, and you are joining me for the July 2019 Space Lesson. Joining me in the studio today, I have two panelists. David Morton, welcome to the program.
Hello, Simon. I am so glad to be here. Very excited to talk about space and stargazing.
Yeah, you mentioned it. You let the cat out of the bag.
Oh,
you
no.
revealed our secret.
Oh, no.
Yeah, in the introduction, I said a new kind of eco-tourism, which of course means like environmental tourism, the idea being that people go different places to see different natural wonders, like a rainforest, or I guess people go to places like Antarctica, too. We've talked about things like that. But in this kind of ecotourism, people are looking at something different. What are they looking at, David?
They're looking to the stars.
Yeah, so they're going places to see things up in the heavens. Our other panelist today is Manya. Welcome back, Manya.
Thank you, Simon. I thought we were going to talk about Hollywood.
Oh, because of the stars.
Yeah, because of the stars, but I guess not. This is probably better.
Manya, are you a big fan of stargazing? Stargazing, of course, listeners, means looking up at the night sky.
No, but I am open. That is not to say I am not a fan. I don't know if I am because I've never done it before.
Well, you know, this is kind of an interesting idea because often when we talk about ecotourism, we're talking about going to a place to see a thing that you know is going to be there when you get there, right? For example, like visiting the Amazon rainforest. But you can't always see stars. And so when you're going on a tour to see something in the sky, I think there's probably a lot more chance that you might not see it. And that might be part of the excitement, right?
Well, yeah, I think especially if you're talking about something like the Northern Lights. You know, it's very, you don't know whether it's going to be there or not be there. And they do have special places, we'll talk about it in our article, where it's more likely that you'll see stars. But it's still, I think that is kind of part of the excitement. You have to plan for it according to the weather.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Northern Lights. I was actually going to ask you as part of this introduction if you had maybe not done like what they call here astrotourism, like star tourism, because that's kind of a newer thing. But if you've ever had an experience where you were sort of watching the night sky and you had a special or magical experience.
I've used a binocular and looked at the sky through them, but that's
Manya,
about it.
That's an interesting word you just used. I hope our listeners are familiar. Binoculars, those are those two tubes you put up to your two eyes so you can see things far away.
Yeah.
That's different from a telescope, which is one tube you put up to your eyes to see things far away, right? So you've used binoculars. You haven't gone to look at the sky, but you might be open to it.
Yes.
Okay, so you are the tourist we need to convince during this 2-day lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. How about you, David?
Well, I really love space, and I've gone to, I've gone to a lot of these special places called like planetariums, which are basically just like museums for
like a star museum.
Star museum, yeah.
Space museum.
Yeah, I love that stuff. And this one time in Montana, actually one of our teachers is from Montana, our teacher Pauline, right? In Montana, I was driving through with two of my friends, and it was midnight as we were driving down this highway. It was very, very dark, no lights around. And we pulled the car off of the road into like a little area, like a service area. And then we all laid on top of the car, and we looked up at the sky, and it was just, I have never seen so many stars in my life. It was amazing.
Because there were no lights around.
Right. There were no lights around.
We get to that idea in the article, too. I have had a couple of really neat experiences. I wouldn't say that they were things I would necessarily pay to travel to try to see, but had a couple of positive experiences. One was I had the chance to watch a meteor shower, which is where, things are coming into the Earth's atmosphere. They look like shooting stars. That's sort of what people might call them. And you can see these little bits of comet or meteor burning up as they come into the atmosphere. That was kind of a neat experience. And I've seen the northern lights that you mentioned. I'm from Canada, of course. They are not a common thing for Canadians to see. But like you said, there are places where you can go where you increase your chances of seeing that sort of thing.
All right.
So today in our article, we're looking at this lesson called Stargazing Tourism Trend. Stargazing destinations lure astro tourists to the night sky. Now, we've mentioned these different words. Stargazing, of course, means looking at the stars. When you gaze at something, it kind of means you are looking at it thoughtfully, almost lovingly.
Yes.
Right? Like you gaze at someone you love.
Yeah.
Sort of looking at it with love in your eyes.
Indeed.
And so this looking at the stars, staring at the stars, this is a tourism trend. And these stargazing destinations, those are the places where you are more likely to see things, lure or attract astro tourists. Now, that word astro, it's connected to space, right? We talk about astronauts, for example. And so these are astro tourists. Now, one of the nice things about this article is usually when we do a space article, we're talking about space stations or spaceships or astronauts. And this is something that normal people here on planet Earth are much more able to participate in. So hopefully, listeners, you will find this to be very useful and maybe something that you might be interested in trying. That brings us to our first reading for today. Listeners, you can find it on page 24 of your Advanced magazine. We're going to look at the left-hand column. Let's get into that reading now.
Stargazing tourism trend. Stargazing destinations lure astro tourists to the night sky. The night sky has become a tourist destination. But wait a minute. Can't we see the night sky simply by stepping outside after dark and looking up? Well, yes. But for most of us, that means seeing the glow from artificial lights reflecting off clouds, water vapor, and dust particles in the air. It's called sky glow. The night sky is so bright, it's hard to see the stars. For most of the time people have lived on this planet, the night sky was inky dark and filled with visible celestial objects. It's inspired poets and dreamers, artists and scientists. It's only been in the last 100 years or so that light and air pollution have diminished those views. And it's only been in recent years that people have started traveling in search of what has been lost. We're seeing dark sky tourism as a reaction against our increasingly busy tech-filled lives, said Daniel Levine, a travel trends expert and director of the Avant-Guide Institute, a global trends consultancy. It's a chance to decompress, be somewhere quiet, and be awed by the biggest question in life. Why are we here?
Okay, listeners, in this first reading, we start discussing this idea that there are different kinds of pollution. Usually when we talk about pollution, we're talking about air pollution or water pollution, things like that. But here we're talking about how there can be other impacts from human activity. And this is something that really strikes me as being very true. As many of you know, I live in Taipei City, like our panelists do, and I am originally from a rural area of Canada. And so one of the things I always notice when I visit my parents' house is how it is so quiet that your ears sometimes start ringing. That phrase means it's like you can hear a ringing in your ears because there's no other sound. It's so quiet. And so there's this idea that there can be other kinds of pollution, like noise pollution, where you're never in a place where it's totally quiet. quiet. Well, here today we're talking about light pollution being a big problem. They also talk about air pollution and things like that. But what has light pollution done to our experience as people, David?
Well, it makes it very difficult for us to see the night sky because the sky is so bright, and it's interesting. I thought about it just as, like the lights from the city or maybe from the tops of buildings or planes that do it, but it's a whole interaction, right? It's the lights are reflecting off the clouds and the water vapor and the dust particles in the air, so it's a mix of natural things interacting with artificial things, and then the result is that the sky's too bright to see the stars.
Now, I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that at one point, if you watched a lot of American movies, there were a lot of scenes of people sort of sitting outside, like in your story, David, kind of sitting on top of their cars looking at the sky. Do you remember scenes like that?
Oh, yeah, in movies and stuff.
Right, but in modern life, we don't seem to be doing that quite as much these days, and that's probably because we can't see as much. And that's really the idea we got into with this reading.
May I admit something that will make me look silly?
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, so there have been a few times, especially when I was younger, where if I was outside at night trying just to enjoy the view, I will think I see an island because I always lived by the water. And it turns out it's just the plane because I realize, the island's moving. And so that's all.
Thank you for confessing that to
amazing.
us, Manya.
Well, I think it relates to the light pollution you're talking about. That's why I brought it up.
Okay, and well, that's okay. So basically, our article here begins by saying the night sky has become a tourist destination. And that really just means the night sky has become a thing that people are traveling to see. And then they continue by saying, but wait a minute, can't we see the night sky simply by stepping out after dark and looking up? So why would you travel to see the night sky is really what this question is asking, right? And they say, well, yes, but for most of us, you're not really seeing the night sky. What are you seeing instead, David?
You're seeing maybe planes that are actually islands. You're seeing satellites. You're just seeing a lot of, you can't really see much of anything. It's clouds that are too bright, reflecting light and stuff like that.
They give us a list here in the second paragraph, right? They say the glow from artificial lights reflecting off clouds, water vapor, which is like steam that isn't hot, and dust particles in the air. It's called sky glow.
Yeah, sky glow.
Yeah, it's
That
an
sounds
interesting
kinda cool,
term.
though.
It does sound cool.
Yeah, sounds like a band name.
It's really like a polluted haze you see over cities at night, I suppose. Yeah. So nonetheless, the night sky is so bright, right? It's very bright, all these stars, but it's hard to see that. It's hard to see the stars because there's so much light coming from the environment around us. Okay. They continue on by saying for most of the time, people have lived on the planet. Something has been a normal situation. So what would the normal situation have been for people most of the time, Manya?
The normal situation would be that the sky is dark at night and it's filled with visible stars.
Yeah. Now, you actually subbed out a bunch of the very creative language they used when you gave that explanation.
Excuse me.
No, that's great because it made it easier to understand.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
They actually use these terms here. They say like inky dark.
Yeah.
Now that's what on earth do they mean by inky dark?
It just means really dark.
Yeah, because I guess traditionally ink, like you use in a pen, right? Maybe it's black ink and it's really dark. So the idea being if you spill ink on a page, the whole page will be very black and dark. And that's what the sky looked like. It was inky dark. And it was filled with, and this was the other term, you said stars, Manya, because that's exactly what they are, but they said visible celestial objects.
Yeah.
Now that term celestial, what does that really mean?
It's just related to stars.
Yeah, it means, well, kind of like space, right? So it could be things like
galaxies.
The moon would be a celestial object. I guess even the sun.
Yeah,
right?
the moon, planets, distant galaxies would all be celestial objects.
Yeah, and that's why they use that word object, because they mean things. Now, there is another term we often talk about in English. We say celestial bodies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's even maybe more creative language. When we're talking about celestial bodies, we're not talking about people's bodies. We're talking about planets, things like that, right? So this situation was very normal for people for most of human history, and it inspired people. What kinds of people were inspired by this, David?
Poets, dreamers, artists, and scientists.
Okay.
Which is great because those are all very different kinds of people.
Well, David, you are a bit of a poet. How would this night sky inspire poets?
I mean, you look up into the sky and you see distant points of light, and it can remind you of a lot of things. For one thing, it can make you feel very small in this vast universe full of all kinds of things. It can also remind you that even on the darkest nights, there are still stars that are shining through in order to give you hope, when life is very difficult.
So glad I decided to ask you
Well.
that. I would have said something stupid like, it was beautiful and people wanted to draw a picture of it.
Which they also did.
Yeah, that's true. So we have painters too. I'll speak to the scientists one. One of the interesting things about science is often the most interesting, useful discoveries that people make, often, not always, are made by, finding things in nature and then sort of copying those things or learning to understand those things better. And so that's how it's impacted scientists. But in the last 100 years, that's started to change. So we mentioned this light pollution and this air pollution, and so it's started to diminish the views, meaning making the views slowly smaller or slowly lower in quality to make them worse over time. But it hasn't been until recent years that people have started to search for what's been lost. And they've done that by traveling. Then we have a quote. Manya, can you tell us what's our quote about?
It says, we're seeing dark sky tourism as a reaction against our increasingly busy tech-filled lives.
Okay, and that comes from Daniel Levine, a travel trends expert and the director of this institute that is a consulting company about travel trends. That quote continues to say it's a chance to decompress. What is that, David?
Decompress just means basically to relax, to release the pressure of life.
Okay. And so you do that by being somewhere quiet and by being awed by the biggest question in life. Why are we here? And that refers to kind of your answer, David. You said there were a couple of things you can kind of get a sense of from the night sky. One was that you're very small.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of this idea. So you can go somewhere and you can put your own stress and life in context and realize that some of these things are maybe not as important as you think. And so people are looking for this. It's also interesting that, Manya, in the part of the quote you told us about, this person mentioned tech-filled lives. Tech-filled lives. Like maybe our technology, which we know can be very beneficial, is also a big distraction. Right? And it's interesting that they mentioned that to me because one of the problems I always have when I return to Canada is getting good cell phone service.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when I go to kind of more remote areas. Like you can get it, but you can't get a lot of good data link and things like that in a lot of more remote places. And so what that means is you end up not worrying about what is beeping through on your phone all the time. And I imagine that can be a very helpful thing in decompressing. So if you're traveling to a place away from cities to see the night sky, you're probably also traveling away from the technology that surrounds you a lot of the time. Now, listeners, that brings us to our second reading. It's under the section called Reaching for the Stars in Chile, and you'll find that on page 24 of your magazine. Let's do that now.
Reaching for the Stars in Chile. Hoping for a dark sky experience myself, I headed to a mountain plateau in Chile's Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, and a mecca for astronomers and stargazers. I settled in at the small town of San Pedro de Atacama, with plans to do some stargazing and to visit the Atacama Large Millimeter Sub-Millimeter Array. Better known as ALMA, It's billed as the most complex astronomical observatory ever built on Earth by the U.S.-based National Radio Astronomy Observatory. In cooperation with the Chilean government, an international partnership from North America, Europe, and East Asia built and operates the facility. Scientists from around the world share time on the telescope for research.
So as we move into this reading, we're really taking a trip together to Chile, which of course is a country in South America. And our writer here is actually taking us along as the writer goes to do some astro-tourism. Right, David?
Yeah. And it's really cool. So we're going to be heading up to a mountain plateau. And it's in Chile's Atacama Desert, which is one of the driest places on Earth. So that'll be great for, the sky conditions. And it says it's so good that they describe it as a mecca for astronomers and stargazers.
Now let's go through some of those words. Manya, I happen to know that you really like the word plateau.
Yes.
So tell us, what is a plateau?
A plateau is... I'm sorry. I'm laughing because
You're
I'm
just laughing
reading.
because you like that word so much.
Well, I do like the word, but I actually like plateaus. And a plateau is a large flat area of land that is high above sea level.
Yeah, so it's like a flat mountain, basically.
Yeah.
Like you go up and then it's a flat place, right?
Yeah.
So we call this a plateau. Okay, great. Now there are some other ways you can use that word plateau, but here they're actually just talking about this geographical feature. Now, David, you mentioned that it was dry, and that meant there were going to be really good viewing conditions. Do you know, why is that?
Well, one of the things we talked about that contributes to sky glow is water vapor.
Clouds,
right.
stuff like that,
Stuff
right?
like that,
Filling up the sky with water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Get
so
that
if
water
things
out
are
of the
dry,
sky. I'm trying to see my stars, you know what I
get
mean?
clear skies.
Yeah,
so this
clear
is perfect.
skies.
David, you also mentioned as you were giving a description that they described this place as being like a star mecca. Now, Mecca, that's actually the name of a city usually, but here it's a lowercase m, so they're not talking about the city. What are they talking about?
Well, they're basically just describing a place that people will travel great distances to go in order to see something or to do something when
Kind
you
of like
describe.
the journey of a lifetime.
Right,
Like the trip of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Okay, and so our writer has gone to this place with the purpose of having a good look at the nighttime sky. So the writer finds herself in a small town called San Pedro de Atacama, which, of course, I assume is on this plateau. And what is the writer going to do there, Manya?
She's going to do some stargazing.
But she's also going to visit something very special.
Yes.
David Morton.
It is the Atacama Large Millimeter / Submillimeter Array.
What is that, David Morton? What are we talking about?
It is okay. So it's better known as ALMA, which is I guess that would be an acronym, or it's a special word for those. I forget what it's called, but it's where you pronounce the letters together as a word. Anyway, it is billed as the most complex astronomical observatory ever built on Earth, and it's actually a series of radio telescopes.
Okay, so we'll get to all those terms here. It's an observatory, which means it's a place you watch things from. It's an astronomical observatory, meaning you watch space from
you
here.
watch the stars.
Right? But then they said it was billed as the most complex observatory. Now, when you bill something, that comes from the word handbill, which is kind of an older term. Basically, often in Asia, people will say DM. It's kind of like a flyer or a printed advertisement. And in the old days, people would pass these out for free with information on, much like they do now when they're distributing direct marketing DMs, right? You know, you're walking down the street, somebody hands you something. So a handbill. And so what that means is it's being advertised as, they're telling people that this is the most complex observatory ever built on Earth. And then you used this other term, something about waves, or what did you say it was?
Well, it's a series of radio telescopes.
Okay. Now, aren't telescopes things you look through?
Yes, they are things you look through. They're things that you look through, like the tube that you described earlier, right? A single tube you look through in order to see things that are far away in space. What a radio telescope is basically it allows you to see a different kind of light, right? So there's a certain amount of light that we can see with our regular eyes, and then there are other kinds of light, different wavelengths, which we won't get into that, but basically it's radio waves, right?
Okay.
Light that we can't normally see, we can see with radio telescopes, which means we're able to see more stars, not just more stars, but also galaxies, and we're able to see the way that these stars and galaxies are interacting with each other because we can see like what they're made of sometimes as well.
Okay, wonderful. So this very complicated observatory is a thing that isn't really open to only tourists. The idea is that it's a partnership between a bunch of different groups that allows different scientists to share time checking out the night sky, I guess because of the really great conditions in the area. But as a result, it's also become an interesting tourist destination for astro tourists. Now, that actually brings us to the end of today's lesson. But listeners, we're going to continue on with this same article tomorrow. And we hope you'll be able to join us as we continue talking about this new trend in stargazing as tourism. Until then, I'm Simon.
I'm David.
And I'm Manya.
Saying bye for now.
Bye.
Goodbye.